Hi everyone. I'm going to be covering an American Libraries Association subcompetency under the Technological Knowledge and Skills competency. The subcompetency that I'm going to go over today is that a person graduating from an ALA accredited master's program in library and information studies should know and, where appropriate, be able to employ the principles and techniques necessary to identify and analyze emerging technologies and innovations in order to recognize and implement relevant technological improvements. So I wanted to show this specific subcompetency in context with the other three because I think it's really important to see how this might be the competency that applies the knowledge and skills gained from the other three. To help me illustrate why this competency is so important, I wanted to reference this statistic from page 289 of the Rubin text. A 2001 Library Journal survey of over 1,000 librarians reported that they perceived the most significant roles as instructing patrons in navigating the web, directing them to appropriate resources, creating e-resources, and establishing digital archives. There were other roles in this list, but out of those 6 roles referenced, 2/3 of them dealt with librarians using technology themselves or helping patrons find resources using technology. So that's a huge skills area to develop, and I wanted to highlight how important it is to find technologies and tools that are most often utilized in each library type, and how those libraries might have come to the decision to use those tools. So within this next chapter, I found another quote in the Rubin text that cited a May 1990 article about the evolving profession in information science. And it says, "There is no longer a need to be concerned with the theoretical and philosophical issues. What we must be concerned with is what enables us to survive in a competitive world, namely information technology. And in information technology is a practical discipline." And this is from page 267. I want to be clear here. I don't think that information technology precludes us from concerning ourselves with theoretical or philosophical issues. Rather, I think that this is the exact sentiments librarians try to avoid when implementing relevant technological improvements. Through this competency, librarians are taught to discern between technologies that are worth learning, and to do this, they might identify and analyze new technological trends, many of which first appear in libraries for patrons' use. Some of these major technological developments are the evolution of the personal computer, ready internet access, online public access catalogs, Web 2.0 technologies, advanced digital preservation techniques like 3D scanning, and ebooks. So what librarians are forced to grapple with is the tricky use of technology that fits in with the culture of their institution. So not all technologies go over well in all library types. To recognize and implement relevant technological improvements, librarians and library staff have a variety of options to gauge the interests of their patrons. But they also might want to specifically engage with ethically collected data from their own cataloging systems. When a patron checks out an item, she might be notified that other patrons who checked out that item also checked out a related resource. So that decision to turn on that technology was one that a library team grappled with, and they weighed the service of the patron against the time and skill necessary to implement the change. The data that lives in library databases can also offer unique techniques to see how patrons are engaging with specific resources. For example, usage statistics. If patrons are using a specific tool more often than another, that might signal an institutional or a cultural preference. And conversely, patrons might not be using a technology because it requires time and labor to use it well. So an example of this might be a 3D printer. Another way that librarians can gauge technological interests with their patrons is through surveys. So they can ask their patrons about the resources they use at the library. Oftentimes, these surveys inform the library staff as well as the patrons. So library staff get the feedback from their patrons, and then patrons learn about new technologies they might not have known about before. And then 2 other more low-stakes ways to decipher whether or not a technology is doing well or might do well in a library is through informal conversations with patrons or anecdotal evidence. So these are, I heard that this library had this service. Do we have that? So earlier I mentioned that not all technologies flourish in all environments. it's important to know the user group and their needs associated with that library. For example, public libraries might have more computer labs and computer banks because they serve a different population than, say, a special library that has a few computer stations for staff to use. Academic libraries might not have many computer labs, and instead they'll emphasize movable furniture so that students can collaborate within a space. And that furniture might also have USB ports and standard electrical outlets in them so that students can charge their own devices because that's what they want to use more often than a computer within a lab. In academic libraries, they might prioritize all of their staff learning how to use authoring tools like WordPress or LibGuides or Adobe Captivate or Articulate. They've decided to use these technologies because the culture of their institution calls for different needs. Special libraries might have more resources dedicated to microfiche machines. Even though technology has advanced, that library might not have the resources to scan, digitize, and host all of their microfiche images. So it's all about the culture of the library. That being said, librarians, as a part of their core competencies and values, hold innovation at a high standard. So they have to be strategic and thoughtful about what to support and for how long. School libraries, sometimes referred to as library and media centers, are really well positioned to engage with technology in a strategic and pioneering way. Users' digital literacy at these schools and the competencies that they have from those digital literacies can drive what technologies libraries should support. So these are things like iPads, tablets, devices, and these might help students create 3D models that can then be printed on a 3D printer. At its core, this sub-competency prepares librarians for the next generation digital literacies for both hardware like 3D printers and software like authoring tools that patrons use to make open educational resources. Librarians can remain current on emerging technologies by joining professional organizations, creating a network with other librarians to keep in touch about what their libraries are coming up with, and finding out for themselves from their own patrons what kinds of tools and technologies might help them meet their own goals. Thank you for listening. I hope you were able to take away a few things. The culture of the library is important, but it is even more important to remember that this core sub-competency helps librarians move forward, so we can't just stick with the status quo. Librarians and innovation need patrons to use the tools and technologies they've thoughtfully integrated into their own workflow. And third, information technology and tools are a means to help librarians and patrons engage with information. So go forth and employ the principles and techniques necessary to identify and analyze emerging technologies and innovations in order to recognize and implement relevant technological improvements.